Hello and welcome. This is Iowa Stages, a podcast about Central Iowa Theater. I'm Matthew McIver, Artistic Director for the Iowa Stage Theater Company. Here with my co-host, Shawn Wilson.
Hello, everybody. And our fine producer, Kyle Bochart.
Hey. Kyle. So, we are very excited to have a conversation this afternoon. Iowa Stages is a podcast that talks about not only shows, but the decisions and the people who make up those series of choices that lead you to an amazing theatrical event. We're excited to have with us two of the stars of Iowa Stages' production of A Doll's House Part 2 by Hnath. I'll let them introduce themselves. Can we start with you, Kerry?
Sure. I'm Kerry Skram, and I'm playing Nora in A Doll's House Part 2.
Mm-hmm. And I am Ashley Schaeffer, and I am playing Emmy in A Doll's House Part 2.
So A Doll's House Part 2, whenever you're listening to this, was running at the Stoner Theater from October 3rd through October 13th of 2019, because the beauty of the interwebs is you could come across this in 2050.
Right.
When we're all living virtually anyway.
So we're doing the revival and bring everybody.
Doll's House Part 3.
Part 5.
The return.
Yeah, it's like
Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, then there'll be a Hobbs and Shaw spinoff.
Yeah.
So,
Hobbs and Shaw.
It's a fascinating play. Hnath obviously is an award-winning playwright who's famous for The Christians and a number of other terrific shows, but it has done the almost unthinkable in renaming a 140-year-old play, because the Ibsen piece now gets continually referred to as A Doll's House Part 1.
Yes, it does.
Ibsen, of course, wrote the masterpiece about Nora, a young woman who discovers that her marriage is not the loving partnership that she thought it was.
Spoilers. Hello.
Oh yeah. Well, you don't have to see the first part to understand the second, but it does help a little give a context as to why it's weird that she's back home 15 years later. So, spoilers again.
Sure.
Doll's House. Nora leaves in 1879 Norway. She makes the choice, the radical, scandalous choice at the time, to leave her family, leave her children, leave her husband, leave her home, and strike out for a new life on her own. Ibsen's play was a massive international scandal at the time. Copies of it were sold out. It was, oddly enough, although he was Norwegian, written in Danish, as were many of the works in Norway at the time. And some of this information is coming from Wayne Kisher, who's done a little bit of dramaturgy for us on it. So, huge international scandal, was a sellout success across Europe, sparked an entire conversation about women's roles, about women's place in society, about the way society treats women. And fascinatingly, Hnath in 2017 decides that he is going to write a sequel. Because, there's no new ideas, so let's just write a sequel to A Doll's House. And he does, and sets it 15 years later. Nora comes back. No one has seen her in 15 years. What has she been doing? How have the family held up? Obviously, the children, who in the first play are quite young, have aged significantly, and Emmy is grown up a little bit in her own. So, just for context, we'll give a little bit of plot for folks, but really we want to talk about with you guys is what kind of choices or challenges, or sorry about that, for punching the microphone there.
It's a pretty high-tech setup.
It's a problem when you talk with your hands and you're being recorded. We'll talk about the choices, the challenges. We'll get into the process a little bit behind it, not just talk plot and all that sort of thing, because they'll get all of that when they come to see it, or the revival in 2050. But just briefly, tell us a little bit about each of your characters. We'll start with you, Kerry. Sure. You've got a pretty significant role in this. You're playing
Nora.
Yeah, okay.
So another thing to keep in mind that I'm not, that I hope audiences keep in mind is that, it was 1879. Women didn't have a lot of options. So the fact that Nora walked out that door, she had no money, she left her family, she left her home. She did not have a lot of options. She couldn't just go start temping somewhere. Women had very limited options for careers. So that's something to keep in mind. And
beyond even careers, I mean, you talk a little bit in the play about there are things that you, as a, if you're married, you're not allowed to basically have a separate life, or
right.
What are the things that you can't do when you're married?
Sign a contract.
Without your husband's
Can't
approval.
Conduct any business without your
Can't
husband
borrow
being
money.
there. Can't borrow money.
That's the whole crux of the first play.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah. And it's weird a little bit to think. I mean, the whole scandal in the first play is Nora takes a loan, which nowadays
she signed a contract without the consent of her husband.
Right, and nowadays you get 15 of those in every mail. But it's like, here, try
they'll
our
give you a
credit
loan
card.
for anything.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody wants you to actually pay for anything. They want you to take the interest. So it's a scandal that she took a loan.
Yes, and so when Nora comes back, and I'm not going to spoil it, but she comes back for a reason. She has something she needs, and that's what brings her home. And then she has an encounter with these people that she hasn't seen for 15 years. Anne-Marie, the housekeeper / nanny. She has an encounter with Torvald. She has a meeting with Emmy.
And
Emmy is my grown daughter now, who doesn't remember me. I like
And
it.
Torvald's your husband, right? Or the Nora's husband.
Correct.
That she left.
That I
15
left.
That she left.
Yes. And
Played by Tom Garrity.
Tom Garrity,
the
yes.
show.
And Cheryl Clark plays Anne-Marie.
Who's the nanny who raised both you and Emmy.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they all sort of take their pot shots at Nora.
They all have their feelings about what you did.
Yeah.
So obviously you're coming at this. There's a historical difference between your condition as a woman in America in the 21st century and Nora's condition as a woman in what still would have been the late 19th century, 15 years after 1879. What's the math?
Right.
1794, 1894, something like that. What was it? Was it weird? Did it feel anachronistic? Was it?
It did not feel weird. One of the lovely things about this script too is that the dialogue is very contemporary. So you're going to come in and see. Hopefully, you'll take advantage of this really unique opportunity we have of being able to see the first Doll's House, and then either later that night or next weekend, you come and see a Doll's House Part 2. And there is definitely a difference in the dialogue. It's very contemporary.
The language of the piece.
The languages,
too.
yeah. And so, but no, it was not odd for me to have to find the feelings of feeling that a woman wasn't being treated fairly or equally. As what was it? Michelle Williams just gave that lovely speech at the Emmy Awards and reminded us all that women earn 50 cents on the dollar on average for what men earn. So, these things are still happening a little bit. Certainly we have the right to sign a contract and conduct business, that sort of thing. But yeah, there's still things going on for sure.
Ashley, what about for you? I mean, is it your character has obviously a different perspective on Nora's departure than the concept of self-actualization or liberation that Nora's coming from. Tell us a little bit about, without tipping too much, about who Emmy is and what that was like for you to connect with.
Yeah, so Emmy is Nora's daughter, and I think in a lot of ways she's similar to Nora. But I think the main thing that shaped her life is the absence of her mother and the decision that her mother chose to leave and chose to end her marriage and walk away from her children. So much of Emmy's views and ideals of the world are shaped by the fact that her mother made this pinnacle decision. So she has a very different feeling towards marriage and family and how she looks at the world because of kind of what she missed out on and what was absent from her life.
Was she someone that you sort of clicked with right away? Did she feel like she was a ways away from you and you had to build a bridge to that space? Or
Yeah, so I think personally, reading A Doll's House in college, I was kind of even one of those people that thought, how dare Nora leave her children? Her husband is one thing, but her children and feeling those things. So Emmy obviously didn't feel too far away from me in that sense. And
so when you read the original,
Yeah.
you weren't like, go Nora.
No,
It was more like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, and I think obviously reading it more and getting more immersed into it and seeing all of the events that lead up to Nora leaving, I will let you make the decision on whether or not you think that's the right choice. But there's definitely a split line to it. It's not black and white. It's not easy to say, yes, she should have left, or no, she shouldn't have left. And so I think it'll be interesting for people to see that and kind of make that decision for themselves. But yeah, I was torn when I read it. You want her to be free and be living her own life and have these, these rights that women deserve and the ability to live a better life. life. But then on the other side, it's, here's this family that she was leaving behind and the damage that will cause. And I think the beauty of A Doll's House Part 2 is for so long, for, over 100 years, nobody's known what that's looked like.
Right.
Everyone's been sitting around, having conversations about, what happened to Nora? What do you think? What do you think happened? And what happened to the family? And in Doll's House Part 2, you get to see exactly what happened and the decisions that caused and the effects that happened.
Right. And that's what I was just going to say. The brilliance of the script is that he's using this almost as a vehicle for people to have this discussion about marriage and about walking away from what you had to create something new. And sorry, but it was well. That's what I was going to say. He's very smart, and he does not talk down to his audience at all, which I think it is lovely, and I think encourages people to have this conversation when the play is over. So
you were both familiar with the original before you tackled this particular process. Were you familiar with Hnath, with the playwright?
Not as much with Hnath for me. I've heard of the Christians, and I've known people who put on the production. I have not had the opportunity to see it, so I was not very familiar with his work.
So good.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. And I've heard.
And you know someone who directed that show, if I.
I believe I do.
Yeah, I think you do.
I believe I do.
That's another example of him tackling something, and I think. In the Christians and in A Doll's House, Hnath is also very respectful of each side. And both sides in both plays make really good points, and sometimes they make not so great points. And I think that's what will encourage conversations.
What do you mean not so great points? What is that?
Or maybe something people won't agree with necessarily,
gotcha.
a differing point of view. Or
he plays both sides.
Yes,
and he plays both sides fairly.
Do you think?
Yes.
Does he come down on one side or the other? Does he?
I don't
does
think
the
so.
play
I don't
have
think
a
so
perspective?
either.
I don't think the Christians did, and from what I remember, so we did a reading of Doll's House 2. Was it last year? Scriptease?
It was 2 years ago.
Was it 2 years ago? And from my recollection of that, it was very fair-handed.
Were you in that, Shawn? I didn't see that.
No, I just watched it.
Watched
it. Did you do the reading?
I did it, and Jonathan DeLima, and Kim
right.
Grimaldi, and Tiffany played Emmy.
Right.
She read Emmy.
Tiffany Flory, who is playing Nora in our production of A Doll's House. We should mention we have a ringer in the room also because Shawn Wilson is playing Dr. Rank in Doll's House Part 1.
But I'm not in Part... Dr. Rank's not in Part 2.
No.
I'll let you figure that one out later.
Yeah. No spoilers. Spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
I know. People have only had 140 years to read it, I think, by now.
Right.
It's on
They should know. Yeah. They really should know.
If you're trying to approach Ibsen spoiler-free, you're doing something wrong.
Well, it's funny. Like if we still need to give spoiler alerts for something that's been out that long. Like it's ridiculous.
I know, right? It's Well, interestingly, the print success of A Doll's House, the run sold out almost straight away. So audiences would have come to the theater having read the play.
Right.
So that was a different practice than we do now, where you might buy a script if you like a show, or if you're in the theater, you might be reading shows that people are passing around. But nowadays we don't read screenplays before we go see Civil War or whatever.
Yeah. I thought how many shows have sequels, like theater shows, like plays. I was trying to think of that today.
Shakespeare did a ton of it.
I was going to say,
Sure.
Yeah, right,
There's 3 Henry VI, there's 2 Henry IV.
Right. No. I'm talking about something other than that, like something that's akin to this, of like there's a part 1 and then there's there was a sequel later.
There's a fascinating sort of renaissance right now. Kerry and I had lunch with a ISU professor who is his
Casey
area
Murphy.
is in Casey Murphy, whose area is sort of rewrites, updates, sequels to work. That's kind of like his field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's a whole thing right now with rewritten Ibsen. I was reading some pieces in the Guardian from.
Oh, I've seen some pieces rewritten. Yeah. That's for sure.
I mean, certainly there was Hedatron was big when I was in New York, which is sort of a robot version of Hedda Gabler. Very odd.
Because why not?
There's a play
Sounds
called
on par.
Yeah, right. Of course, that's oddly enough, is it with the Fringe Festival?
What I was getting at though is that for the most part, and this is what I'm most interested in, like how much more helpful it was in that when you're an actor and you're coming in to do a show, you have a script. you have the script, right? And the script is what's in front of you. In your guys' case, you have the script, which is what Hnath wrote, but you also have like the whole backstory. It's not just like lines written out for you, what you think happened.
Right.
You know, you have that. So was that helpful to you? Because I know that you guys came to some of our practices and watched, and did that inform like?
Did you watching the 5-year-old Emmy?
Yeah, did that,
yes,
did
so
that,
informative. Mm-hmm. No, but I do think
picked up some of her mannerisms.
I do think watching. Yes, absolutely. I do think watching Tiffany though, as kind of young Nora, helped me to see. You know, even it's kind of the nature versus nurture. You know, despite Nora being out of Emmy's life as she's growing up, how much she still get from her? How many of her mannerisms and the way that she goes about life and her outlook, how much of that is just dictated by nurture? So it was interesting for me watching Tiffany, and that was one of the things that I was interested in doing is, you know, seeing how she approaches young Nora essentially, and how that can, you know, help shape Emmy's character as well.
And we should point out, too, Iowa Stage Theater Company is doing these shows in repertory. On the same set.
Yes.
Which is not the common practice. This is, I mean, Doll's House Part 2 is one of the top 10 most produced plays in America in this current season. And it is only one other company has produced these shows in rep, and that's the Denver Center Theater Company, and they did it opening on September 6th of 2019. So like only 3 weeks before ours opens.
Right.
It's not customary for them to be done together. For the three of you who are in these shows, do you feel like that was an advantage? Was it a strain to try and be doing these together? Or?
I love it. Yeah. I love it, and I love that. I think I said to you at the read-through, I'm like, if I wasn't in this, I would be totally taking advantage of seeing these on the same day. And I hope that theater goers do that. And maybe people who aren't used to going to the theater take advantage of this really special thing that's going on right now. I love it because I feel like, well, to answer your question before, Shawn, I love having all of that information.
Oh, God.
Come in.
Yep.
Someone has arrived.
Suddenly we're on Jeopardy. Oh, my God.
Well, we better get
to
places.
That's like keep your hands in the ride at all times.
It was.
I'm buckled up.
Buckle up. It's an Iowa Stage podcast.
So what were we saying? Going back to
I love having that backstory. I love knowing Nora's backstory. Again, Doll's House Part 2 stands alone. It is its own play. It's its own story.
Sure.
You don't even need to know a Doll's House Part 1. You get the story.
Everything that you need in the course of that.
But I mean, as an actor.
Yes. And as the actor, I loved really watching, especially that last scene, to see what.
In Doll's House 1.
Yes, in Doll's House 1, we watched a rehearsal to see the climax happen, that argument between Nora and Torvald, to remind me, you know, how awful it was and what prompted her to leave. And so, you know, I loved that. I love having that. So, yeah.
And I do feel a little bit of a nerd saying this, but every time I think about it being in rep and the potential that somebody could come see the show, see Doll's House, you know, during the day, and come see Doll's House Part 2 at night, I just get like the Harry Potter vibe. I'm like, yeah, we're like Harry Potter, you know. God, what's the whole title of Harry Potter on Broadway? And the Cursed Child, you know, where it's like a two-parter. That's essentially what this is. Like, oh, you would need to commit to seeing both parts a day. Yes, it's not $700. So lucky for our audience, but it's the same kind of experience. You can go see, you can go see both parts in the same day, the exact same magic. Absolutely, right.
I will have to do a little searching. That may have been the first time Ibsen's been compared to Harry Potter, but
probably not. They're very similar. It seems to me. I mean, I'm only in the play, but that's what I feel.
Right.
And I am wearing a wizard robe throughout most of it.
Actually, you make a good point.
Very close to it. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, too, because you're coming at this from two different perspectives in terms of your relationships to Iowa Stage. Kerry, you are a company member. You were a company member with one of our heritage companies, Repertory Theater of Iowa, before they merged with Stage West in 2017. You've tackled a lot of the sort of classic roles through the years. You're coming at this from the perspective of a company member.
Right.
So I'm curious for you, Ashley. You're joining us for the first time.
Yeah.
You're recently moved to Iowa from Chicago, where you've been for a while. Give us a little bit about your background and what it's been like, sort of you getting your feet wet in this environment. Anyway.
So I grew up in the Des Moines area. I'm from Ankeny. Went to Iowa State and then moved to Chicago. Yes, went so far away for college.
20 minutes
Absolutely.
away.
Yes, the 30-minute drive up to Ames, Iowa is treacherous. And then I moved to Chicago and was in Chicago for the past 4 years and then decided to move back home to where family is. So I've done things in the Des Moines area kind of my whole life since I was 6 years old, I believe, starting with the Ankeny Community Theater and then the Des Moines Playhouse, and did some stuff up at Iowa State during my time there, and did a couple Stage West productions before I moved to Chicago. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting you.
Yes.
So
which was so fun. And then did a couple things in Chicago and moved back. So, it's been so great to get back into this theater community that I love. There are so many people here that I just cherish so much, and the work that we do in Des Moines is amazing for a smaller community. And this experience has been great, and all the actors that I've been working with are so talented, and the production crew and everything has been...
Even Garrity?
Even
Garrity
Garrity.
plays Torvald.
Yeah. No,
Tom
but
Garrity's also a longtime company member
Yes.
and quite a fine actor. We should
very good
clarify for the posterity.
yes,
I would
but
like
sorry, Kerry. Last thing, I think the care that the Des Moines theater community takes with the work that it decides to put on is kind of second to none for a lot of the theaters that I've worked with, and so it's a joy to be back here and be working with Iowa Stage for the first time. So it's been great. Yeah.
I'm so excited about that. Kerry, you've, both of you have long roots in the community in terms of that. How do you see this show, which is a newer show, fitting into sort of what Iowa Stage is trying to do in terms of combining those two, the missions of RTI and Stage West, going from the classics to the cutting edge?
Right. Kind of fits right in there, doesn't it? It's sort of this play that has its roots in the classics with the original one, but like I said earlier, the language is very contemporary, the writing's very contemporary, and we are working on the same set that Doll's House is on. It's a little bit different, but same set, and the costumes are period, but our mannerisms aren't necessarily. So it's this really wonderful blend of this sort of classical feel. And I think the audiences might experience that when it first begins, and then they'll quickly see that there's some language.
Work too. You guys are working with Jody Jinks as the director.
Yes,
So you mentioned the costumes. Susanna Douthit, Chloris Award winner
Love
last
her.
year for Lion in Winter,
Yes.
which Kerry was also in, and which Shawn directed. And Jay Jagam, the multiple Chloris Award winner, unless I'm mistaken.
No,
Yes.
he's multiple.
So
He has earrings made out of his Chloris. And a matching necklace, I think.
that's
yeah,
great.
he's going for a whole belt, I think. Doing some extraordinary work in what is a fairly challenging space for this kind of, where the Stoner Theater is a great performance space. I mean, Sage West was here for years, but it's an interestingly shallow thrust that presents some challenges for this kind of staging. To talk about just that environment a little bit, that set that you guys are working on and working with. I mean, you're in corsets, which is a whole other thing for people who.
Well, how about just coming
that
back
is
to
a
the
whole
Stoner?
other
You
thing.
haven't been in this. For me, I haven't been here since at least 2012, and I'm not even sure I've seen that many. I saw some shows, I think, past that point, but I haven't performed here.
I haven't
and it was
performed in a
so
long time.
weird
That have
coming
been
back.
The vibrator play?
Yeah, it was in the next
next
room,
room.
vibrator play. Yeah.
Which was the first show I think I saw you in,
What was the last show that
Show
you
I met
did?
during, was it?
Well, you were Next to Normal. That was here.
Yep.
and that was after that.
2013, 2014.
Bill and Bob, maybe.
13,
Oh,
I think.
Bill W. and Dr. Bob.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
Carla directed that.
Bill W. and Dr. Bob. Parts of whose set live on today in many other sets.
Are they? I think that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Did we not burn those yet?
Oh
Okay.
no, Jay and I counted. They've been in either 8 or 9 shows.
Yes.
Those pillars have.
Hey,
been.
recycle.
Hey, we have to be thrifty in the theater. So yeah, in the Stoner, it's a unique space with a lot of history to it. What's it like being back in that room?
I don't. It was lovely. I mean, tonight's our first tech night.
Oh,
so
that's right. You guys haven't even
we
been
just
here
walked in
yet.
and saw it in all its
What was your
glory.
reaction?
So.
You saw pictures of the set, of course. What was the reaction to seeing it in the space?
Oh, I walked in and I was like, oh.
It's beautiful.
It looks like a jewelry box.
It changes
I mean,
the room,
really,
doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the mood.
changes
Yeah,
the
for
space
sure.
in a
Well, Jay
fascinating
does
way.
that. Jay
Yeah.
just can do
Yeah,
that.
fantastic. So, yeah.
And Jody Jenks, who's directing this, really interesting resume and background. She's been on Broadway. She's done the Rude Mechanicals, which is one of the premier devised theater troupes out of Austin, Texas. She's a member with them. She's taught. She's really interesting background. What was it like working with her? Her work style is really interesting to me.
Yes, and I just actually sent her an email last night, and I just said it's been such a pleasure working with her. She's very lovely. I will just say this play is hard. Mm-hmm. This is not your typical. I was trying to tell this to my parents the other day, and I'm not sure I can articulate that.
Talk a little bit about what it's like on the page, because it's unique.
Yes, it's not a back and forth dialogue. It's not a normal back and forth dialogue that you'll see in A Doll's House. Everyone has a lot to say, and so people will speak for a few pages.
But it's not necessarily in a paragraph form.
Right, and actually, Hnath gives very specific directions in A Doll's House Part 2.
It's almost prose, right? Like from what I remember, it's like very
more like
prose-like.
poetry or...
Yes.
Yeah, poetry, prose. It's just like very the lines kind of like separated.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's lineated,
And he gives directions. You know, if there's a dash, it means this. If there's an ellipses, it means this. And so I think Ashley and I talk about this quite a bit. We went through and we all sort of memorized our lines in this manner. I found that at some point you have to let a little bit of that go, or you can start to sound very mechanical. You've memorized it, and so you're reciting it the same way over and over again. I finally just kind of had to let a little bit of that go. But it stays with you, so you're getting the rhythms in there still. That was hard to tackle. But Jody has been really patient with us, and I feel this has been such a lovely experience because it's such a new play. So nobody has a history with it, really. Any of us did. Maybe you've seen it or you've read it, but we're all tackling it for the first time. And we're all sort of discovering this together. So it's been this really lovely theatrical experience that you don't get to have that often of all learning a play together. Jody's in it with us. We're all trying new things. And it's just been a very encouraging and a very we've all been very patient working with each other and trying new things. It's really lovely.
Yeah, and I think the beauty too is we are all able to have such open and honest conversations about these are not easy kind of topics to tackle, the things that we're discussing in this play and that we're putting out there. And so I think the ability that we have had and the environment that Jody has created for us to be able to discuss these things so openly and honestly, and to really get to kind of the root of not only what these characters feel, but what we feel and how that infuses into how we want to produce and put on the show. So it's been great.
Well, it's been fascinating, Tom. I love these. I'm with you guys. I think they're fantastic, and they, while they are dealing with the same characters, they are so like Luke. The Doll's House 2 is different. It's much more conversation. It goes right directly to the point where Doll's House is so sort of effusive about there's just more plot going on, whereas he's,
right.
And it's such a cool thing, I think, for people to be able to come and see both of those shows at the same time.
And different theatrical styles. I mean, Doll's House is
absolutely.
realism. It's like it's naturalistic experience.
Right.
And Doll's House Part 2 is much more. It's a more of a boxing ring. It's more of a playground. It's more of a it's a place for these ideas to contest rather than just a naturalistic conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think that's all the time that we have.
This has been great, guys.
Today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes,
We're
thank
excited
you.
about the shows. Thank you,
Thank
Ashley.
you.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you.
And thank Kyle Bochart.
Thank you, Kyle Bochart.
DJ Kyle over here. Turning knobs. Thank you, Shawn. And
thank you, Matt.
This has been Iowa Stages, a podcast about Central Iowa Theater from the Iowa Stage Theater Company.
I think men need to wear corsets as well. If women are.
Right now.
It's a unique experience. When you've had that opportunity, you really don't forget what that feels like physically. We also should mention Jim Tremper is doing some really interesting stuff with the lights. The mood and the look of the piece is terrific. Well, thank you so much, guys. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your work on the show. We're excited for people to see the show, and if they're catching this after the show, I hope you saw it, because if not, you really missed out. That's A Doll's House, happening at the Stoner Theater of Des Moines Performing Arts, opening September 27th, closing on the 12th of October.
Yep.
And you can check out tickets and the whole season at iowastage.org. So, Jennifer Mistrala, Tiffany Flory, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
All right. This has been Iowa Stages, a podcast about Central Iowa theater from the Iowa Stage Theater Company.